Welcome to Platt House, and thank you for coming to our 10th birthday celebration. My name's Laurie McCall, and I'm the very lucky person that gets to be director of this fabulous space filled with creative, talented, and very fun students, as you can hear. I want to thank a few people quickly. I'd love to thank my staff, Platt House staff, and VPUL colleagues for helping us get this far. And I need to acknowledge someone very important who came all the way here from Boston today, Ty Furman. Ty was my predecessor, in case you didn't already know, and he had the vision and the persistence to help get Platt House started and built and created. Of course, today's extra special because we are joined by Mark and Julie Platt and Jonah as well. The Platts are our biggest supporters of the students that perform here. They're not just sponsors, but friends and cheerleaders, and we really appreciate them being here. And when we started to plan for this 10th anniversary celebration, and we met with Julie, and she made it clear that this celebration should not be about them, but about the impact that Platt House has made in the past 10 years. And that is indicative of their grace, their generosity, and their modesty, and we thank them very much. So before we start, we'd like to show you the impact that Platt has had for the past 10 years with a brief video. If you saw it yesterday, bear with us, it is quick. That pairs alums that were here before Platt House with current students in the same groups. We hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Looking back now, see, I can do this as an alum. I can have hindsight wisdom. Looking back, there was a certain distance created between us and the other performing arts groups who were our friends. I mean, we would go see their shows, and they would come see our shows, but those were the main intersections. So we're off in our own world, and we're not really having that type of interaction with all the creative energies that I think you probably experienced at Platt.
Platt was actually my sort of first home at Penn. I used Platt for everything. I study there, I rehearse there, my friends are always there, so like Platt has really sort of become my central location. In terms of like meeting other groups and other things like that, like all my friends from like other groups, like friends that I have in Singers, Tacky, Penn Dance, Arts House Dance Company, like all of them are always in Platt and always studying or hanging out or
What's your biggest struggles now in terms of performing?
I mean, for us, it's always space.
Space.
Yeah, even
when you have a perfect place, it still doesn't solve all of the space problems.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many of us.
So what's been the biggest benefit, in your opinion, of the Platt House? I mean, I know it's always been a part of your college experience, so.
Just the support. I just started chatting with people. I still didn't think I was going to do it, I think, after I left, but it's just like this nice community. And Platt's like such a nice lounge. There aren't a lot of spaces where like I can hang out that isn't in a dorm. And Platt is like one of those few spaces. There's always free snacks, and the room's really big. And
there's free snacks?
Always.
Man.
And free coffee. And free printing.
Free printing?
Yeah.
What's the impact on, how does it make theater productions easier by having the Platt House, space aside, you know, in terms of being, or do you feel more connected to the people because you can.
Oh yeah, I mean we have like our individual groups, but I think you were saying earlier like you were like steadfast players. We don't like. We have our groups and like we do identify with them. So like I'm an Intuitons and like not talk person because I was on those boards. But we very much like if we're talking to someone else, we just say, yeah, I do theater. Like, yeah, I'm in the Theater Arts Council, which is one of the reasons Platt's nice because we're always there mingling and like I'll come down to like study and I'll see like 3 other people that are in shows that I've worked on, which is not something you get if there's not like a central space.
Right.
Early shows we did with funk were in nightclubs,
right?
Because like there was no theater space.
Yeah,
you know, it was the same. It was the same thing, and so you.
With dancing specifically, you don't just need the big room for everyone to fit into. You need mirrors. You need the speaker system. There's so many factors that all need to go into it for a productive rehearsal, let alone an actual rehearsal.
Yeah, and people don't realize how much space you really need to dance.
Yeah.
It's like you just like bring your arms out.
Yeah.
It's just like, you need a lot of space around you.
Yeah.
And I think it's also like it's really important to think about like not just space as in physical space, but space as in like how space feels.
Right.
And I think like that was like something I realized going into Platt House yesterday is it absolutely feels like this magical community. Like the vibe is on fire, it's just like you feel like all these artists coming together and you have music and you have dance and you have, all these people like working together and even now as a professional director and choreographer, so much of my work is about collaboration and crossover and like working with different people. And for example, I'm working a lot with like hip hop and classical music now. And, in a place like Platt House, that kind of collaboration, that kind of crossover can happen because you're just walking by and you hear this rehearsal and that might inspire a whole nother like direction for you as
collaboration between groups. I mean, I'm sure you can relate to this and remember this, but it's just having that core family within a school that's so large and at times so competitive has just meant the world to me.
Thanks for the video, Lori. I can truly remember working with Ty on a regular basis to try to find rehearsal space, and quite a few years later, I still apologize for how I acted. My name is Trip Hornick, class of 2002, a proud... Seriously, I do not deserve that, but thank you so very much. A proud alum of the Mask and Wig Club. Hey, guys over there. And I had the great pleasure of getting to serve on the Platt House 10th Anniversary Host Committee and the Homecoming Host Committee. It is my distinct pleasure, and there truly are no words for this besides superlatives, particularly given that I get to have the pleasure of producing an upcoming West End musical, to introduce our guest of honor and lead sponsor for this, what only can be called wonderful space, Mark Platt. Mark stands among the few producers who have successfully bridged the worlds of theater, film, and television. His projects have garnered a combined 17 Oscar nominations, 18 Tony nominations, 17 Golden Globe nominations, and 29 Emmy nominations. His productions include Broadway's Tony Award-winning blockbuster, Wicked, Fox Television's mega hit Grease Live, for which he won the Emmy Award, and the films The Girl on the Train, Bridge of Spies, Into the Woods, Drive, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Legally Blonde, and the highly anticipated La La Land, to be released this December. He is also producing Disney's sequel to Mary Poppins, starring Emily Blunt, Lin-Manuel Miranda, and Meryl Streep, for which he begins rehearsals in London this week. I really don't feel that I'm qualified to read how great this is. I'm not kidding. Mark is a passionate Penn alum from the class of 1979, a former member of the Glee Club and a founding member of Quadramics. Mark and his wife Julie have been incredibly generous and gracious in supporting the student performing arts at Penn. 10 years ago, they established the Platt Performing Arts House. And today, we are incredibly excited to welcome Mark, Julie, Jonah back. Mark will be interviewed today by Pearl Lowe. Pearl is a double major in cinema studies and communication and is also sub-matriculating into the Graduate School of Education in the Division of Higher Education. Pearl is heavily involved in the performing arts. She's a member of the Performing Arts Council Executive Board as a community service chair, where she coordinates the after-school program. She is a coordinator for the Penn Arts Pre-Orientation Program and is currently directing the Vagina Monologues. In addition, I know, she is a member of the Glee Club, Osiris, and the Oracle Senior Societies, and a Platt House student staff member. Pearl hails from Los Angeles. Please join me, with a big round, don't give it to me, please join me with a big round of applause for Mark Platt.
Do you want to move that out of the way?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much.
How about this one? Are you kidding?
No, thank
So happy to be here.
All right.
Hey, gang. How's everybody doing today? Everybody having a good day? Beautiful weather.
Thank
Happy
you
to be
again
here.
so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, to start things off, how did your experiences in the performing arts at Penn inspire the career that you've had?
Well, the thing I love most about Penn, I don't know if I'm getting a reverb here, was that all the student performing arts, when I was here, were really run by the students. Mm-hmm. So I had the opportunity actually to learn and acquire many of the skills that I use today as a producer. So on the creative side, learning to tell a story is learning to tell a story, whether you're telling it on stage or with a camera. So I directed many productions here and learned to utilize my creative resources. So for example, we used to do, Quadramics used to do an outdoor musical during Spring Fling. I don't know if that still occurs or not, but so one year we did Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Forum. Mm-hmm. So in Forum, usually the essential set for Forum are 3 different houses because they're 3 houses of 3 different characters, and the comedy goes in and out of the houses. So because we were doing it on the quad, we looked around the quad, and I thought, oh well, if you look at the upper quad, like the very upper quad, there's literally 3 arches that lead to the tiny triangle at the top. So that became our stage. So I built out a platform, and the 3 arches became the set. So that kind of creative thinking was learned just by rolling up my sleeve and doing it. Mm-hmm. And then on the logistical side, on the sort of more organizational side, problem solving is problem solving. So trying to figure out how much money you need for a set, or how to fill an audience, how to sell tickets. It's the same. I mean, it's more sophisticated. The more sophisticated your productions become, but I learned it at Penn. And what I loved about it is that I could pursue all of my other interests in the classroom, which weren't arts related. I was interested in writing and sociology and lots of different liberal arts. I kept away from math and science, but that would be Julie's brain. But and the fact that I could afford myself the opportunity of learning so much in the classroom, but then leave the classroom and pursue my interests. I was very active in the Penn Glee Club. We used to perform every year at Zellerbach. The a cappella groups that existed back before all of you were born, I'm talking about, were within the Penn Glee Club. I got to be in shows, produce, direct, and that's really how I learned how to be a producer.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love producing as well. So
Yeah, I attribute it all to Penn, so right on Pennsylvania. True.
Well, why did you and Julie want to create Platt House 10 years ago? And what do you see as its enduring impact here at Penn?
Why do we want to create it? I'm not sure that Amy Gutman gave us much choice, first of all, is the real answer. But listen, the performing arts at Penn informed so much of my college experience. And my college experience is very, very dear to me, and I've carried it with me my entire life. I met my wife here, actually. I don't know if you've ever seen a production. I've ever seen a production of Godspell. So the last time I actually ever acted was once at Penn when I was a freshman in a musical called Godspell, which ironically is written by Stephen Schwartz. And Stephen Schwartz is who I hired many years later to write the musical Wicked. So it all starts at Penn. And there's a song in Godspell where the members of the cast, or at least our director, had us take a glass of wine and you would present it to someone in the audience. And I presented it to the then Julie Barron in the audience, who then later became Julie Platt. So all things come back to Penn. Like I said, we had many wonderful friends at Penn. In fact, to this day, we graduated in 1979, which is many, 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 many years ago. All of our friends started a newsletter called The Monthly Pennsylvania, and there must be about 50 of us that subscribe to it since the day we graduated Penn. Now, this is almost 40 years later, and that newsletter, which now comes electronically, of course, but it used to come in the mail, for all these 40 years has kept us up to date on births and birthdays and anniversary and sadly deaths and growing families, and now we're into grandchildren. So we have a network from Penn. Thirdly, because the performing arts meant so much to us, and my children, all of whom performed in one capacity or another, several of which attended the university, including my son Jonah, who just finished a year on Broadway, performing in Wicked, actually, among all the other great things he's done. So we really wanted a place that not only provided rehearsal space, because we knew there was a dearth of rehearsal space, but where there was a real synergy, where kids who were like us, who were creative, could meet and create an energy, because it is true that creativity happens in the most unexpected of places. And I've had creative meetings in anywhere from airplanes to bathrooms and wherever there's an energy, something great can happen, because creativity is fluid and it has no filter, and it comes, for me, it comes sometimes in and out of what I'm thinking. So to have a place where that energy could exist among students was very important to us. So it was really an easy gift to make, and a gift of genuine love, really. And that to see what you've all made of this place, and the fact that it is so well used for all these years under the different leaderships really warms our hearts very much, and it gives us a lot of great joy, truly.
Thank you so much for that. Platt is my home at Penn, so.
I'm so happy to hear that.
Thank you. Well, you've worked in film, television, and theater. Can you talk about a seminal project in each genre and share what draws you to the work that you do?
Well, that's a good question. Let's start with what draws me to the work that I do. I think that I'm drawn to a couple different things. If there's an idea or a character or a subject matter that provokes me because it inspires me, or it's a story I think needs to be told. Years ago, when I was president of a motion picture studio, I came up with an idea that became the film Philadelphia, because I was living in a time then, again, probably before most of you were born, but when there was a terrible epidemic of AIDS, and so many of my friends, because I was in the film, TV, and theater business, were dying, actually, and I felt, well, there's a real need to tell a story in that subject matter. And the movie eventually became Philadelphia with Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington. Is anybody familiar with them? It was many years ago. Well, the reason it was shot in Philadelphia is because of Penn, and two of my favorite scenes in any project I've ever been involved in. One, it takes place in the Furness Library, and it's a scene between Denzel and Tom Hanks. And Denzel plays a lawyer who's homophobic and does not want to take on the representation of Tom Hanks as not only gay, but he's sick with AIDS. And Tom starts to read the Constitution of our country. And Denzel starts reading, and the camera sort of pulls up like this over the table in Furness. And I always was very inspired by that moment. The film's directed by Jonathan Demme, who's a filmmaker I've collaborated with on many films, Silence of the Lambs, Philadelphia, Rachel Getting Married, and our most recent was called Ricky and the Flash with Meryl Streep. And the other scene in that film that I love is just a moment. And it's a moment where Tom Hanks has been rejected by every lawyer in town. Nobody will take on his case. He was wrongfully discharged from his law firm, and he believes he was fired because he was gay and he was sick with AIDS. And he wants someone to represent him, and nobody will take on the case. And the last person he goes to is Denzel, who says no. And he comes out in a street corner, and he says to himself a phrase that I use every day on every movie set or in every theater rehearsal all the time, which is every problem has a solution. Every problem has a solution. And he's standing there with this most beautiful but sad look of a man who has no place in this world and nowhere to go. And I reference it not because I love the scene in the line, but because he's also wearing a pen hat. And that comes from me. And that comes from me. So a little piece of me. So that was where subject matter. Often there's a filmmaker that I'm so inspired by that if he or she gave me the phone book, I would say, please let me produce it. So 2 years ago, I saw a film called Whiplash. Anybody familiar with the film Whiplash? So I was very taken with this film and met this young filmmaker. He's now 31 years old. And he had a script that was a genre that I love, a musical, but it was very different. It was a script that paid homage to the old Hollywood film musicals made initially for film, for cinema, not for stage. And it was this beautiful love story, but it was painted in these very sort of broad, quirky colors. It was retro, but it was contemporary, and nobody in Hollywood wanted to make it. And he asked me if I'd produce it, and what drew me to that was not just the musical, was this voice of this kid. He wrote the script as well, because he struck me as just so vivid in his point of view, and so eager and so hardworking. And I said, I will do this for no money, which I did. The movie became La La Land, which is a very special film, and I'll be very excited for you all to see it when it comes out in December. So sometimes it's the individual involved. Wicked was a book that I had read, and I thought there's a genius idea at the core of the book. I found the book actually, and Gregory Maguire wrote the book, knows how I feel about this, very hard to get through. If you really want to know the truth, I'm not sure I've ever read the whole book, but it's true. But I did feel at the center of it was this genius idea about taking a very iconic character from literature and culture and film that is presented to us culturally as the epitome of wicked. And the idea of turning it on its ear and exploring what is goodness and what is wickedness, what is good, what is evil, by coming to telling a story, well, you know what, she isn't wicked, it's the world around her. It's the social media of the time that portrays her that way when she's actually a woman of great justice. So that idea and the fact that it was wrapped up in characters that were very familiar to us, Wizard of Oz characters, I thought was a great idea. And the truth is, I started developing that project as a film, and had a couple screenplays written by a very successful screenwriter, Linda Wolverton, who wrote, among other things, Beauty and the Beast, the original. And it was lacking something. And one day, Stephen Schwartz called me and said, I know you're developing Wicked as a film. Did you ever think of turning it into a musical? And the moment he said music, the light bulb went off in my head, because I thought, well, what's missing in these screenplays is magic. And the magic that's missing is that it's a world that wants to be musicalized. So that led me to Wicked. So there are different reasons. And in terms of which one I prefer and why, which is part of your question, I feel very lucky and very fortunate because I have all sorts of ADD, but most especially creative ADD, I call it, that I get to play in different sandboxes. And I love film. I love making films. I love the people. I love sitting with writers. I love being on a movie set. I love being in an editing room most especially because nobody else is there, including actors, so you can just have control and do what you want, which is awesome. I love being in the theater, and the fact that I get to tell stories in different medium and different businesses is just lucky and exciting to me. And I'm drawn to the story, and once I'm drawn to the story, the question is, in which medium is the best place to tell the story the way I want to tell it? And that's how I determine whether something should be a film, as most of my projects, or a musical, or a stage, or a play. So storytelling is storytelling. You're telling a story on film, or you're telling it in the theater, or you're telling it on TV, you're still telling a story. So it has to have a strong narrative, it has to have strong characters. Those ingredients are all the same. Then how you tell that is different. The camera does things that we can't do in the theater. Lighting in the theater can carve out space in a way that a camera can on film. And these are things you just learn. And the businesses of each, of course, are different as well. In television, I've mostly been drawn to date to sort of event projects because of the subject matter, or again, the person. Years ago, an old friend of mine, one of the great actors of the last century, Paul Newman, had a book he loved called Empire Falls, which was actually a Pulitzer Prize winning book. And Paul asked me to produce a miniseries called Empire Falls. And so I did a miniseries just because it was the last thing actually that Paul Newman ever did, and his wife Joanne as well. And so I did it for them. Because I do a lot of musicals, when the musical, live TV musical craze began, I started getting a lot of incoming calls from folks in Hollywood and from Broadway saying, would you like to make this on TV? Would you like to make this? And the truth is, I wasn't looking for a gig, for a job. I'm happily very busy, and I wasn't wanting just to do a television project, but I did think to myself, what would interest me in TV is if I could tell a story in a way it hadn't been told before, taking advantage of the medium of live television, which I didn't think anyone really took advantage of. So when the folks at Paramount called me and said, we own the rights to Grease, would you consider doing Grease? I thought, well, I thought there's an exuberance and a joy in Grease, number one, but because I had the rights to the movie, or I had the opportunity to have the rights to the movie and the play, and because it's not like Sound of Music where the Nazis are coming and stuff, this is just like Grease, I could play with it and sort of sublimate the Grease to my bigger idea, which was, I don't know if anybody saw Grease live on TV, or you can, but my idea there, and I did it in collaboration with a terrific director by the name of Tommy Kail, who directed Hamilton on Broadway. And Tommy's an old friend, and we got together and we thought, well, how can we take what is live theater, which is a world Tommy has only lived in, and how can we take the grammar of cinema, and then how can we combine it on TV live? Because it was live, like the theater, but like film, TV is communicated through camera. So between you and the screen, there's a camera or cameras. And so we came up with this idea that we would, in every scene, there are moments and scenes where if you watch it, you can't tell that you're live almost, and it's edited live, 34 cameras, and you can never see the cameras. It's edited live as if it's a film, but there's always moments within scenes where you're very aware that there's a live audience, it's like a theater, or where the camera will pull back after you've been in a scene and reveal that two actors who you thought were singing in completely different geographies were actually standing right next to each other, like in the theater. So that was inventing a new grammar, and that's why I did Grease live, and that's how I pick and choose.
That's incredible.
It was a very long answer to your question.
No.
Sorry.
It was great, thank you. And so performing obviously runs in the Platt family, with Jonah recently ending a run in Wicked, Ben making headlines with Dear Evan Hansen, and Hannah an alum of Off the Beat. What did you do or not do as they decided to pursue careers in the arts? Any advice for them that might be applicable to Penn students considering the same?
Well, to get into the Platt family, you have to have perfect pitch, first of all. And you have to sing really well. And that's particularly hard on the kids who bring their intended spouses home to us. So they have to audition. And I'm telling you the truth, actually. So my kids grew up in a home where music was a big character in our lives. We all love music, and Julie sings as well and plays the piano, and we would, as a family, sing at family events, which we grew into other families' events, which is how we acquired the name the Von Platt family. That's what they know us in Los Angeles. So music was always something I was hopeful my kids would pursue, because music's always enriched my life. It's always enriched Julie's life. It's you know, it feels just like another friend of mine. Music. There isn't a day in my life that doesn't have some music in it. And I spent a lot of time at Penn in music. I used to be up in, well, before this space existed, I would go up to 511 up in the Annenberg Center. And my mentor at Penn, the great Bruce Montgomery, whom I think about often, led the Glee Club in those days. And so music was always a part of my life every day. So my kids always had music. They pursued it in high school. They enjoyed it in college. And then two of my kids have pursued it professionally. And and there's a couple things I'd say. First of all, if you're a parent, the last thing you want in the world is for any of your kids to go to the performing arts, because I don't care if it's their dream, because it's miserable, because it's all about rejection and stuff. And you know, as a parent, you're only as happy as your least happy child. So like, I would much prefer them to become like lawyers or doctors and get jobs. I don't have to think about it anymore, but you have to think about when's the next audition. But I jest, because of course they have to pursue their dreams. I think my advice always was to them, don't study it in school. I'm not a believer. Many kids are very single-minded. I actually believe in, I call it filling your pockets. If you're an actor, especially, if you're a director, if you're a writer, you're a storyteller, fill your pockets with history and art history and political science and stories, whether it's literature or nonfiction, that you can actually still learn in liberal arts education in universities like the University of Pennsylvania. And then, when class is over, throw yourself into singing, if that's your thing, or directing, or writing. And that's where you learn. It's somehow between the classroom and outside the classroom. And that's my advice to anyone pursuing it, that both inside the classroom and out are equally as important in developing your craft and your minds, your intellect, and learning how to apply your creativity. Creativity is intuitive. It's not something you can teach. I can teach you how to structure a screenplay and where the first act and the second act and the third act is. I can teach a story or how to reverse engineer what a payoff should be, or I can react to something. But in terms of that fairy dust that a writer can put into dialogue, or the unexpected idea or reveal that you didn't see coming, or as an actor, the choices that one may make that are idiosyncratic and not expected, that's not something you teach. You can always sort of teach the rest. So that would be my advice.
That's great advice, thank you. And I know you mentioned La La Land, but do you have any other upcoming projects that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, actually, I think we have a clip of 3 upcoming movies, or one's already out and 2 are upcoming. So why don't we look at that, and then I can tell you about, do we have a little clip?
You know things most of the rest of us will never know. That's gotta weigh heavy on a young man's shoulders.
For the first time in my life, I feel close to something bigger than myself.
It's my understanding that the woman who has gone missing was his nanny.
I saw her. I saw her from the train.
Did you murder Megan Hipwell?
No.
Why are you here?
Because I'm afraid of myself.
City of stars, are you shining just for me? City of stars, there's so much that I can't see.
So there's 3 films. The Girl on the Train came out with Emily Blunt, and then the great filmmaker Ang Lee, 3-time Oscar-winning, brilliant visionary director, asked me to produce a film based on a novel called Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. That comes out in November. And then La La Land, which is a musical with Ryan Gosling, with whom I did a movie called Drive with, and another movie probably nobody saw called Lost River, which was his directorial debut. You can't make them all good, but we tried. And that's directed by Damien Chazelle. And then I start actually, I'm actually leaving tonight. We start rehearsals on a movie called Mary Poppins Returns, which is a sequel to Mary Poppins. So original score written by Shaman and Whitman, who are most known for Hairspray, among other things. And it stars Emily Blunt as Mary Poppins and Lin-Manuel as from Hamilton as what you would consider the Dick Van Dyke character. Instead of chimney sweeps in this, they are Learys, and Learys were the fellows who lit the lamps, the street lamps in London, and then doused them in the morning. And he's a Leary, and Meryl Streep is in it, and Colin Firth and Ben Whishaw, a really lovely group. Dick Van Dyke is in the movie, actually, and so he's 91 years old. But he's coming over. And that's directed by Rob Marshall, who did Into the Woods with me in the film 9. It's our 3rd collaboration. So that's the next film. Currently on Broadway, I have a great evening of comedy, if anybody gets to New York, called Oh Hello, which stars John Mulaney and Nick Kroll. Nick Kroll from Comedy Central, and John Mulaney was a head writer Saturday Night Live. And they have this wonderful evening where they play, they're both in their late 30s. They play 2 old Jewish guys on the Upper West Side. And it's quite an evening of comedy based on the characters that were part of the Nick Kroll show on Comedy Central. And then in the spring, I have a musical coming called War Paint, which is the story of 2 women who, my partner on it is a Penn alum, David Stone, who's also a Penn alum. And it's the story of 2 women who created the cosmetics empire, and were women's of great industry at a time where women weren't in American corporate culture. One of them was a woman by the name of Helena Rubinstein, who was a Polish Jew, and she'll be played by Patti LuPone. And the other was a woman named Elizabeth Arden, who was sort of a very waspy society gal, played by Christine Ebersol, 2-time Tony winner. And they hated each other. And because they hate each other, it makes good fodder for a musical. And it's written by and composed and written by the team that did Grey Gardens. And it's directed by my dear friend Michael Greif, who directed Rent, he directed Next to Normal, he directed David and my last musical called If Then, with Idina Menzel, and he's currently directing a musical called Dear Evan Hansen, starring Ben Platt, and then he'll go and do War Paint. So that's my next couple things up. On television, nothing's announced what I'm doing, so I can't really say because it'll get on social media, but I'm going to do another very, very well-known, beloved musical live, and also Andrew Lloyd Webber is writing an original musical for me for television, for live television. So that's the next step I'm going to try and take, is do something original for live TV, and Andrew is writing it as we speak.
Wow, I can't wait to see all of it.
Let's hope they're good. So you
I'm
never
sure
know.
that'll be excellent. And last but not least, would you like to share your fondest memory here at Penn?
Well, see, my fondest memory is obviously the minute I met Julie Barron, because if I don't say that, I'm not going home tonight, actually. That actually was my fondest moment. We had many fond moments. We were very, very lucky to get to go through college together, because, for many reasons, because our life friends were, we met our friends together as a couple. We shared so much of the same experiences, and so that has informed so much of our life, and why we love Penn so much, because it was so informed so much of our personal and our professional lives, and et cetera. So that's I mean, I had a lot of fun moments. Some of them I can't mention here. I went to school in the 70s. We were wild. So I can't talk about the games we used to play. I had many fond memories of the Penn Glee Club. And I always use an opportunity when I come here to mention Bruce Montgomery because I loved him so. But the thing that I loved about Bruce that did inform me was we were just as, there weren't as many student performing arts groups and certainly not many singing groups when I was there. And we would put on this show every year. And we would perform it just around the Philadelphia area. But Bruce had a way of making you feel that every time you went out on the stage, whatever you were singing, you were like opening on Broadway. It was like opening night. So when you're 18 years old and you have that adrenaline thrill, and there's something that was very aspirational about that and the way that Bruce informed that experience for me. And so I have many fond memories of that. One in particular, I'll tell you, was my freshman year, or was my sophomore year. We performed in the Zellerbach Theater and put on our big show. And there was a segment, I think we were in Ties and Tails or something, and the lights came, we finished singing. This is a true story. The lights came down, and I don't know where my mind was, but the Glee Club exited stage right, and for some reason, I exited downstage right into the orchestra pit. And I flipped over, it's a true story, and fell right into the pit. So, it's a true story. So many, many fond memories. It's great.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take questions.
Since this is being audio recorded, I'm just going to speak into this if you don't mind. We have time for about 1 or 2 questions. So,
ask
anyone
away.
in the audience? There we go. Are you going to do Hamilton on the screen?
That's so funny you ask. So Lynn and I are very good, very close collaborators. I met him many years ago because there was a fellow who was an assistant musical director on Wicked for my musical director, but I thought that this kid, he was a kid at the time, he's not a kid now, was actually the most talented. And my musical director was very well known, but this kid I thought was kind of brilliant, and somehow he and Lynn and I sort of befriended each other before Lynn did a show called In the Heights. And this kid became Lynn's musical collaborator, his musical director. He did In the Heights, he just did Hamilton. He's now musical directing Dear Evan Hansen. His name is Alex Lackamore. So Lynn and I are doing Mary Poppins, and we are actually producing together a live action version of Little Mermaid. And Lynn and Alan Menken are going to write a couple new songs, and that will be live action Little Mermaid. And in that conversation, because Lynn asked me to help him learn to be a producer, we talked about Hamilton, the film. And my feeling on that is, first of all, it certainly is, I told him, if you're smart and a little lucky, you won't be wanting to have this conversation for 15 or 20 years. And second of all, the thing about Hamilton is so inherently theatrical that it'll be interesting to see in 15 and 20 years if the grammar of the music, which is so specific, the genius of it, of course, is that he's communicating the current narrative of the world we live in this country by musicalizing it with contemporary music, but giving us a history lesson. And it's the way he tells the history lesson that actually makes it a story about the world we're living in. It's so theatrical that I don't have in my head yet, I said to him, and neither does he, exactly how that will translate. But I have a feeling if it does, he will be at the helm of it, very much so.
Any more questions? All right, well, I'd like to invite
Ty.
up. Oh, we have one, Ty, Mr. Furman.
About films and musicals. Wicked film.
Oh, Wicked film. So, it's been 13 years. So there will be a Wicked film. Soon. When I say soon, the earliest it's a couple years, It's been announced for 2019 Christmas. Is that right? Whether that happens or not, it's going to happen. I have to say that in case anybody from Universal Pictures is listening. So 2019 is when it's happening, Christmas Day, for sure. Actually, the screenplay is being written as we talk. Winnie Holzman, who wrote the original book, is writing the screenplay. We have lots of great ideas for it because Wicked actually, the first time we did a reading of the first act only, it was 3 hours long. There's actually a lot of story that isn't on stage. Now, if it's useful story, we'll have to see, but there's actually a lot of elaboration on a lot of the sort of family of characters. If you know the show at all, there's the sister Nessa Rose and her relationship to Bach, the character, and there's the love triangle between the Prince Fiyero and the two girls. And the truth is, we elaborate a lot more on that group of five, Alpha, the Good Witch, the Bad Witch, and those three others, in a way that was actually very moving, but didn't have time for it in a 2 hour and 50-minute. So a lot of it got cut. So on a film version, it can be enhanced. And I also think it's, because we all know The Wizard of Oz as a film, there is a lot of cinema to be mined from that story. It was actually the challenge of the stage musical was taking a script that actually read slightly more cinematic than it did theatrical and figuring out how to give it a theatrical language on the stage. So there will be a film, and Stephen Daldry, who directed the film Billy Elliot, as well as the stage musical Billy Elliot, in addition to many other great films, is directing it. So it's coming along.
Time for one more?
Anybody have any ideas for casting of Wicked? I'll take them.
Mark, we have one right here.
Yeah, sure.
So, Philadelphia, I think, for a lot of us, holds an important story about people making change in important movements who are just regular people. And now is the time of a lot of crisis, and wherever you are, politics in the world. And are there any project stories that you would like to tell to another generation like you did with Philadelphia?
That's a great question. And it's a great question for me in particular because I guess what I always look for the opportunity to do would be what is now called sort of a form of social entrepreneurship. But for me, it's more of what my skills are and what my assets are. How can I use them in a way that does make a difference? My first and primary obligation is always to entertain, whatever the genre of the film or the show, whether it's comedy or drama. But there is an entertainment, there is in laughter, and there is in storytelling and music a way to open people's minds and eyes in ways that governments can't, and the way that sometimes societal barriers prevent from free-flowing back and forth. And when people ask me, what do you consider your singular greatest achievement? As a producer, creative, I always cite Philadelphia. And my name isn't on the movie. It's just a movie I instigated with a creative team I work with a lot. And it's because it was that moment for me professionally where I could take my skills, my position, and tell a story that was dramatic and in its own way entertaining, but change the world. I can't tell you the number of letters I got, particularly from mothers who had lost their boys. And this was a time where the subject matter was very taboo. It was very quiet. And it made enormous difference in my life. So I'm always looking for that. And I'll tell you one, just because I just was exposed to it. And it's a true story, and and it's going to have a great director attached to it, I can't say. But a colleague of mine is actually a lyricist. His name is Benj Pasek. He's a lyricist of La La Land and also Dear Evan Hansen. He and his partner Justin Paul wrote Dear Evan Hansen. And he has a friend who went to Penn. It just occurred to me. He has a friend who went to Penn. And this friend at Penn met a kid for 10 minutes. And it's the kid story I'm going to tell you real quick. The kid is a lovely Muslim young man from Yemen. And the kid from Penn met him for 10 minutes at a conference in Bosnia. So let me just tell you this kid Muhammad's story really quick. Because one night, Benj Pasek knocked on my door, and because he told me, I want to bring my friend from Penn and this young kid from Yemen, and they came into my apartment and sat until 2:30 in the morning, told me this story. I'm going to tell it really quickly. He says, kid Muhammad, this is a true story, and it happened a year and a half ago. He grew up in Yemen, in the northern part of Yemen, to a very famous, successful family. There are different sects of Muslim in Yemen. There's a north and the south. I'm going to spare all the sort of details. He was from a very highly regarded family. And he was brought up with the Quran, which he respects greatly, but was taught to hate both Jews and Israel, and that's just what he was taught in Yemen. It's not obviously the Muslim culture, and it's not the Quran preaches at all. This is what he was taught in his family and his friends. And he has a little bit of a handicap. He has a withered hand and a little bit of a withered leg, and his father was always embarrassed by it. And everyone in his family is a doctor, except for him. And his father always said, you have to do something distinctive in your life because you can't be a surgeon, you can't do the things. And so he learned English. And in Yemen, they don't learn English very well. He became really, his beautiful English. And he had a professor from England who was his teacher. And when the professor left, he gave him a book in English. He said, I want you to just read the book. And it was the Bible. And so this kid starts reading the Old Testament. And he starts reading stories in the Old Testament that he finds are not sort of dissimilar from sort of metaphors that he learned in the Quran and weren't filled with some of the stories he told the Old Testament had. They weren't incest and dark and evil. And he kind of fell in love with it. And he called this professor and said, I've sort of fallen in love with these stories of Abraham and this and that. And the professor said, well, first of all, you read the wrong book. You're supposed to read the New Testament, not the Old Testament. But I'd given him both. But this kid really sort of fell in love with it and started to question, well, why do we have to hate each other? Why can't I be Muslim and like others? So he went on social media quietly, secretly. And he found chat rooms that were filled with Palestinians and Israelis and Muslims and Americans and Jews and Christians. And he found different chat rooms that were kind of peacenik chat rooms where the benefit of social media, there was a free exchange of information. And he felt for the first time part of a network of young people that he could relate to, each in their own religion, each proud of it, but with no sort of barriers. And somehow he started talking to his friends about it, which was very dangerous for him because he started to get sort of threatening phone calls that he was a secret agent for the Mossad. He then applied for a visa to go to a conference of Muslim and Jews in Bosnia. He goes to the conference, had a wonderful time. He had a 10-minute exchange with a former Penn student who was part of this program. They exchanged emails for 10 minutes. That was it. He goes back to Yemen. He's now getting terrible death threats on his phone. Muhammad, are you home? The phone would ring. Are you home? We know where you are. You're an agent for the Mossad. He had to flee his home, fearing for the safety of his family. He goes to the south of Yemen, which is a different part of the country with a different sect of the Muslim religion. And when he gets there, he's in an apartment building, and there's a lot of al-Qaeda in the south of Yemen. And just when he gets there, the civil war in Yemen breaks out. And the south is controlled by the al-Qaeda, and the north is controlled by, I forget who it is, and he has the appearance of someone from the north. And he will tell you if he would go out on the street and not carefully, he would be killed on the street because al-Qaeda was killing people from the north on the street. And the airport is shutting down, and there are bombs exploding. Saudi Arabia is involved, and there's sort of a de facto war there. And he has a computer and a cell phone and some food, and he's alone in an apartment. And he goes into that chat room on social media, and he finds 4 people: a Christian girl from Australia, a Jewish kid from New York who went to Penn, a stand-up comedian, 4 kids from Stanford University, and someone in Tel Aviv. 4 people from different parts of the world, all different religions. And they become his lifeline. He basically sends out an SOS. Can you help me? I'm stuck. And these 4 kids, each not knowing the other, respond, and all of a sudden become sort of this little army on social media trying to help this kid escape. And I'll spare you all the episodes, but I'll just tell you 2 or 3. These 4 kids call the Navy SEALs, they call governments, they get responses. We can get them out for $50,000 with a plane, but the airport shuts down. They tell him that if he can get to the Sheraton Hotel, there are UN workers there. I mean, and this social network grows all around the world of people trying to help this 24-year-old kid stuck in an apartment in southern Yemen. And they say if you get into a car and get to the Sheraton, there are UN workers, you'll be saved. So he calls for a car, he goes outside to get into the car, and there are Al-Qaeda everywhere, and they surround him. And they put him on the ground, and they hold guns around him, and he's shaking. Mind you, he's got a handicap, and he's crying, and they say, do you have papers? And he says, yes, I have papers up in my apartment. They hoard him up to his apartment, and because they're very respectful and modest religious Muslims, they ask him, is there a woman in the apartment? And he says, yes. No, there wasn't. Because there's a woman in the apartment, the Al-Qaeda soldiers wouldn't enter. They say, go in, please, get your papers. He goes in. He calls his mother on his cell phone and says goodbye to her. He says, I'm about to die. Okay? While he's on the phone, he hears an explosion outside. He hears gunfire. And he hears shouting. And he looks out of his window, and there's a guy on the street surrounded now by the Al-Qaeda. They got distracted, and they were down the street. He was saved. Bottom line is, with this social network, these people get him to the UN Hilton Hotel. The UN people abandon him there because they only save themselves. But there's an interesting story. This kid from Penn has a friend who's this is music, who's a 18-year-old brilliant Filipino pianist and Muhammad thinks he's alone in this hotel, in the basement of the Sheraton, alone. And he's crying, and this kid from Penn says, I want you to hear this music, which he'd never heard before. And there's one other hotel worker there, not with the UN, who's there with Muhammad, not friendly to him, but he's there. And this kid on the piano plays Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And Muhammad starts crying over the phone, this beautiful rendition, and the other hotel worker, who isn't being friendly to Muslim because he thinks to Muhammad because he thinks he's a traitor, starts crying, and he says, "I'm going to help you get to the sea where there's a ship." Bottom line is, the guy gets on a boat because these social network kids, all your age or slightly older than you, somehow got a U.S. senator to get a government that I can't name, a foreign government, to get a fishing boat to not only get Muhammad, because they had to take Muhammad out, they ended up rescuing 100 other Yemenis at the same time. Muhammad then made came to this country, didn't know anybody. When I met him in my apartment, he'd been in this country 2 weeks. He's now living in Washington. He has a job. He's applied for asylum. I told him to take his story and sell it as a book proposal first, which he did for a lot of money. It's being published as a book, and I'm now going to sell the film rights to it, because there's a line in the Quran and there's a line in the Talmud, which is the commentary, and it's both the same line. And the line is, "He who saves a single life," it's a version of this, it's as if he's saving the whole world. And the aspirational quality that any one of you could be sitting at your computer and get an SOS from a kid 8,000 miles away, different culture, different religion, and actually be empowered to take time from your life and do something because you can, I think is an important story. And it makes all the barriers melt. So I'm not only going to sell that, I'm very intent on making that damn movie. And it will star, and by the way, this will sound like not a big deal. It is in Hollywood. It's essential to me that the center of this movie is not the social network kids. It's the Muslim kid, which means it will be an unknown actor. I only reference that because it makes it a challenge in Hollywood to make a movie without a movie star. But this movie is going to be contemporary, millennial, and aspirational, and my attempt to try and, through an entertainment, but a true story, inspire others to do the same thing. So, there you have it. Thank you.
Mark, I can't thank you enough for your time. It's a great pleasure to invite to the stage to entertain you the Glee Club.
All right. That's a great story.
Oh, that was
It's a true
amazing.
story.
Do you know when it's going to come out?
Yeah, I haven't sold it yet. So it has to get sold and written. Oh, come over here now. So I can watch.
Somebody to love. Each morning I get up, I die a little, can barely stand on my feet. Take a look in the mirror and cry, Lord, what you're doing to me. I spent all of my years believing you, but I just can't get no relief, Lord. Somebody, anybody find me somebody to love. Can somebody find me? 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 I work hard every day of my life. I work till I ache my bones. At the end, I take practical, my hard-earned pay all on my own. I get down on my knees and I start to pray, and the tears run down from my eyes. Oh, somebody, anybody find me somebody to love. Every day, I try, but everyone wants to put me down. They say I'm going crazy. They say I've got water in my brain. Got no common sense, I got nobody left to believe. Yeah. Someone find me. Can somebody find me? 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 No feel, I got no rhythm. I just keep losing my beat. I'm okay, I'm alright. I ain't gonna face no defeat. I just gotta get out of this prison cell. Someday I'm gonna be free, Lord. Find me somebody to love. 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 Somebody love. Somebody love. Somebody love. Somebody love. Somebody love. Anybody find me somebody to love.
Mark, on behalf of Platt and the Performing Arts Council, we'd like to just give you this little token of our appreciation for everything you've done.
Thank you so much.